Heavy boots slammed on the concrete, their sound reverberating through the barracks like a sudden, jarring storm. "What in blazes is this?" Drill Sergeant Brick tore the cover from the bed, flinging it to the ground in front of 200 new soldiers standing ramrod straight. His fury zeroed in on one figure at the far end of the line, who remained completely still. It was a woman, her slender build appearing almost delicate against the drab gray walls of the military dormitory. "I questioned you." Brick shoved his face close to hers, spittle flying with each word. "What on earth is this supposed to be? These are supposed to be perfect, razor-sharp bed corners. My 5-year-old manages better than this." The woman Ivory offered no reply. At 34 she was older than nearly all the others in the room by at least 10 years. She simply stood there, her gaze fixed on a spot just past the sergeant's shoulder. From the far corner of the barracks a quiet chuckle broke the tension. "Looks like Grandma's trying to be a soldier," Private Raven whispered, loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Maybe she got lost on her way to the retirement home." Brick spun to face Ivory, a cruel grin spreading across his tough, weathered face. "Do you know why you're here, recruit? Because some dimwit in human resources was having the worst shift of their career and decided to make it my headache." He grabbed her footlocker and flipped it over, sending clothes, toiletries, and personal belongings clattering across the concrete floor in a chaotic spill. 20 minutes. Brick leaned in close, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "Clean this up. If I return and see even one sock out of place, you'll run until your legs give out and your lungs burst. Is that clear?" "Yes, Drill Sergeant," came the answer, barely a whisper. The other recruits exchanged glances, some feeling sorry, others amused. Ivory bent to gather her scattered items. No one noticed the swift, exact way her fingers moved, folding each piece with an efficiency that spoke of countless repetitions in darkness, in silence, in places where a single misplaced sound meant death. At the far end of the corridor, General Silas stopped mid-step. The 2-star general was there for a routine checkup, nothing more. But something about the woman on her knees captured his attention. He frowned, observing how she held herself even while kneeling. There was something in the curve of her back, the controlled economy of her actions, something familiar, yet he couldn't quite place it. Colonel Edwin appeared beside him. "Sir, the vise is ready." Silas nodded but didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman, who was now meticulously putting her footlocker back together with mechanical precision. In 20 minutes, everything that had been scattered would be perfectly organized again, each corner straightened, each item aligned with a military exactness that shouldn't have been possible for a new recruit. In 20 minutes, General Silas would recall where he had seen those movements before, and when he did, everyone in that barracks would wish they had kept quiet. The morning sun cut sharp lines through the barracks windows as Ivory rose from the floor, her footlocker now spotless. Around her, the other recruits held their positions, some sneaking curious glances at the older woman, who had clearly become Brick's main target. Private Raven nudged Private Amber, barely hiding a smirk. $10 says she doesn't last the week." "That's generous," Amber replied. "I give her 2 days." Crystal, the third in their small group, tilted her head. "What's a woman her age even doing here? Midlife crisis." The whispers traveled. They always did in places like this, bouncing off concrete walls and metal bunks, until everyone knew exactly what was being said and by whom. Ivory heard every word. She remained silent. Staff Sergeant Garnett marched down the aisle, tablet in hand, conducting the administrative part of the morning's inspection. He paused at Ivory's bunk, scrolling through her file with clear doubt. 34 years old, he read aloud, making no effort to lower his voice. Civilian background, office work. He looked up, his gaze traveling from her graying hair. "Care to explain why someone with your background thinks they belong in the United States Army?" Ivory met his eyes. "I want to serve, Staff Sergeant." "Want to serve?" Garnett repeated the words as if tasting something foul. "Every 18-year-old kid who walks through these doors wants to serve. They're young, they're strong, they can actually keep up." He stepped closer. "What makes you think you're anything special?" "I don't think I'm special, Staff Sergeant. I just want to do my job." "Your job?" Garnett shook his head slowly. "We'll see about that." He moved on, but not before making a note on his tablet. one that Ivory knew would follow her through every evaluation, every test, every chance. In the military, first impressions were lasting ones, and hers had just been marked in red. Technical Sergeant Flynn entered the barracks with the manner of a man who had experienced everything and was impressed by nothing. He carried himself with the unique confidence of someone whose skills had never been successfully questioned, and his reputation was well known. Flynn had been taking apart and rebuilding weapons since before most of these recruits were born. "Listen up," he announced. "Today's practical test will check your basic weapon skills. You will take apart and put back together the M4 carbine. The time limit is 2 minutes." He paused, letting the information sink in. "Those who fail will repeat the drill until they get it right. Those who repeatedly fail will have a conversation with me that none of you want to have." The recruits shuffled into formation as Flynn's assistants handed out the rifle. Ivory watched the weapons being distributed, noting which ones showed more wear, which had been properly cared for, and which would pose difficulties. When her turn came, Flynn personally placed the rifle in her hand. It was older than the others, its finish worn, the mechanism slightly stiff from poor oiling. "Let's see what Grandma can do," he mumbled, just loud enough for the nearby recruits to hear. Ivory looked down at the weapon in her hands. Her fingers knew this rifle. They knew every type, every quirk, every way it could fail, and every way to make it perform. But she forced her hands to fumble, to hesitate, to move with the clumsy uncertainty of someone who had never held anything more dangerous than a desk stapler. "Begin," Flynn ordered. Around her, the sounds of clicking metal filled the air as recruits started taking apart their weapons. Some moved confidently, others with clear difficulty. Raven, 2 stations down, worked with practiced ease, her father's Marine training obvious in every move. Ivory's hands trembled slightly as she separated the upper and lower sections of the rifle. She made a show of squinting at the parts, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and carefully designed to appear unskilled. "Finished," Raven announced, sliding her fully reassembled rifle onto the table with a triumphant smile. 1 minute, 22 seconds. "Excellent work, Private," Flynn nodded approvingly. "That's how it's done." Raven swelled with pride at the praise, shooting a scornful glance toward Ivory, who was still struggling with a small part of the rifle. "Time," Flynn called out as the 2-minute mark passed. "Those who haven't finished, step back from your stations." Ivory stepped back. Her rifle lay in pieces on the table, barely half reassembled. Flynn approached, shaking his head slowly. "What did I expect?" He picked up the components, examining them critically. "You know what your problem is, recruit. You're not just slow, you're unsure, hesitant." He set the pieces down with more force than necessary. "In combat, hesitation kills, not just you but everyone around you." "I understand, Technical Sergeant. I'll do better." "You'll do better," Flynn snorted. "I've heard that before from people half your age who actually had potential." He turned to address the group. "Let this be a lesson. The Army isn't a charity. It doesn't care about your feelings or your dreams. It cares about results. And some people simply aren't capable of delivering them." He moved on, leaving Ivory standing among the scattered parts of her rifle. What no one noticed, what no one could have noticed, was the slight adjustment she had made to the weapon's sights during her clumsy examination. A fraction of a millimeter, impossible to detect for the untrained eye, but enough to correct the factory problem that would have sent every shot 3 inches left at 100 meters. Old habits, it seemed, were hard to break. The afternoon sun beat down on the main parade ground at Fort Bragg as the recruits lined up for physical evaluation. Brick paced before them like a hunter watching his prey, his eyes always finding Ivory. "Due to certain failures during this morning's inspection," he announced, his gaze fixed on her, "we have a special treat for one of our recruits today." He stepped closer to Ivory. "You, Grandma, get to show us all what you're made of. 5-mile penalty run, full gear." A murmur rippled through the formation. Full gear in this heat was brutal, even for the youngest, fittest recruits. "I want to see you suffer," Brick continued, his voice dropping into a casual tone that somehow carried further than his shouting. "I want to see you realize exactly how out of your league you are. And when you collapse, because you will collapse, I want you to remember that I tried to warn you. Some people just aren't cut out for this life." Ivory stood still, her expression unchanged, What are you waiting for? Move. She moved, not with the desperate sprint of someone trying to prove themselves, but with an even measured pace that would conserve energy over distance. Her breathing was controlled, rhythmic, falling into a pattern that combat medics would recognize as ideal for sustained effort under pressure. Brick watched her go, waiting for the stumble, the gasp for air, the first signs of breaking down. They did not come. 1 mile, 2 mile. Ivory's form remained steady, her stride unbroken. Other recruits began to notice, their attention drawn to the woman they had dismissed, running with the machine-like consistency of someone who had done this not hundreds but thousands of times. What the hell? Raven muttered. Is she actually keeping pace? Private Asher, a young recruit who had kept to himself since arriving, stepped forward slightly. She's not just keeping pace. Look at her feet. That's not normal running form. What do you mean? My uncle was special force. He used to run like that, called it combat pace. Asher squinted against the sun, watching Ivory round the far turn. It's designed for covering ground fast, while still being ready to drop into a firing position at any moment. Raven scoffed. You're seeing things. She's just an old woman trying not to die. But Asher kept watching, and his frown deepened with every stride Ivory took. 3 miles, 4 miles. The afternoon heat had claimed several younger recruits who had collapsed by the side of the track, struggling to breathe. The medics were busy. The instructors were worried. Ivory ran on. Brick's expression had shifted from scornful amusement to something harder to read. He pulled out his stopwatch, checking the times, calculating the numbers in his head. That's not possible, he mumbled. Something wrong, Drill Sergeant. Garnet had appeared at his side, drawn by the same sight. Her pace, it hasn't changed by more than 2 seconds per mile. Brick shook his head. Even experienced marathon runners vary more than that. How is she staying so consistent in this heat? Garnet studied the distant figure, still moving with that eerie mechanical precision. Maybe she's not as out of shape as she looks. Nobody's that in shape, not without serious training. 5 miles. Ivory crossed the finish line exactly where Brick had ordered her to stop. She was sweating, certainly, her face flushed from exertion, but she was not gasping, not staggering, not showing any of the distress signals that should have accompanied such a punishing run. Time, Brick demanded from his assistant. 37 minutes, 42 seconds, Drill Sergeant. Brick's jaw tightened. That time would have been respectable for recruits half Ivory's age running in favorable conditions. In full gear, under the afternoon sun, it was remarkable, but he was not about to admit that. Took you long enough, he snapped, getting in her face. Now get back in formation. We're not done with you yet. Yes, Drill Sergeant. Ivory walked to the formation, her breathing already returning to normal. She took her place at the end of the line, her expression as blank as it had been that morning, as though nothing had happened, but something had happened. In the command vehicle parked at the edge of the parade ground, General Silas lowered his binocular. That woman, he said to Colonel Edwin, runs like she's done it under fire. Edwin raised an eyebrow. Sir, the pace, the form, the way she kept her head on a swivel even while running. Silas set down the binoculars. That's not civilian fitness. That's not even regular military training. I want her file on my desk by 1700 hours. Yes, sir. May I ask why? Silas did not answer immediately. He was watching Ivory take her place in formation, watching the way the way her eyes tracked movement even while appearing to stare straight ahead. Because something about her doesn't add up, he finally said, and I don't like mysteries in my command. The evening meal was a quiet affair, recruits too worn out from the day's events to engage in much conversation. Ivory sat alone at the end of a long table, methodically eating her food with the efficient movements of someone used to meals being cut short by emergency. Asher approached with his tray, hesitating before sitting down across from her. Mind if I join you? Ivory looked up, studied him for a moment, then returned her attention to her food. It's a free country. I'm Asher. He waited for a response that did not come. I just wanted to say what you did today. The run, that was impressive. It was a punishment. Yeah, but you didn't treat it like one. Most people would have been angry, or tried to push too hard at the start or complained about the unfairness. You just Ivory took another bite, chewing slowly. What's your point? I guess I'm just curious. Who were you before this? For the first time, something flickered behind Ivory's eyes. Not anger, not fear, but something more complex, something guarded. I was nobody, she said. An administrative assistant, desk job, nothing interesting. Right, Asher nodded, but his tone suggested he did not believe her. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're doing fine. Better than fine. And I think Brick knows it too, which is why he's pushing so hard. Before Ivory could respond, Raven appeared at the table, flanked by Amber and Crystal. Well, isn't this sweet? Raven drawled. The old lady found a puppy to follow her around. She turned to Asher with mock concern. Careful, Private. Sucking up to Grandma isn't going to help your career. Asher's expression hardened. I'm just having a conversation. Something wrong with that? Everything's wrong with it. Raven planted her hands on the table, leaning toward Ivory. Let me make something clear. I don't know why you're here, and I don't care. What I do know is that you're making the rest of us look bad. When Brick has to waste time dealing with your failures, he takes it out on everyone else. Then maybe you should talk to Brick about his management style, Ivory said calmly. Excuse me, Raven's voice rose. Did you just sass me? I answered your statement. Listen here, old woman. Private Raven. The voice cut through the mess hall like a blade. Master Sergeant Hugo stood at the end of the table, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Is there a problem? Raven snapped to attention, her face flushing. No, Master Sergeant. Just a friendly conversation. Looked pretty friendly from where I was standing. Hugo's eyes moved to Ivory, lingered for a moment, then returned to Raven. Perhaps you should save your friendliness for the training ground. Dismissed. Raven retreated with her followers, shooting venomous glances over her shoulder. Hugo watched them go, then turned to Ivory. For a long moment, he simply studied her, his gaze moving from her face to her hands, to the way she held her shoulders. That's an interesting way you have of holding your fork, he said quietly, like you're ready to use it as a weapon. Ivory's grip shifted slightly, becoming more casual. Just hungry, Master Sergeant. Hugo nodded slowly. I've been watching you today. The way you run, the way you stand, the way you're always aware of where the exits are. He paused. I served in Fallujah, 2000s. I've seen people move the way you move. For the first time, something like tension entered Ivory's posture. I don't know what you mean, Master Sergeant. I think you do. Hugo's voice dropped even lower. But don't worry, whatever your story is, it's yours to tell. Just know that some of us are paying attention. He turned to leave, then paused. And for what it's worth, your parade rest is better than most officers I've served under. He walked away, leaving Ivory alone with her thoughts and her rapidly cooling meal. In the command building across the base, General Silas sat at his desk, reading a file that should not have existed. Ivory's background check had come back spotless. Too spotless. 10 years of employment at a single company, no criminal record, no military service, no unusual activity of any kind. It was the kind of file that professionals created when they needed someone to disappear. Edwin, Silas called out, get me the Pentagon liaison on a secure line. I want to know why this woman's file has classified sections that I can't access. Sir, that could take days. Then it takes days. But something's wrong here, and I want to know what it is. Edwin hesitated at the door. If I may ask, sir, what made you suspicious? She's performed poorly in every evaluation today. Silas looked up from the file, his expression distant. That's exactly what made me suspicious. She's performed poorly, but she's performed consistently poorly. The same mistakes, the same hesitations, the same fumbles. That's not incompetence, Colonel. That's control. You think she's hiding her ability? I think, Silas said slowly, that we have someone on this base who is very, very good at appearing to be something she's not, and I want to know why. The night settled over Fort Bragg like a heavy blanket, bringing cooler temperatures and a false sense of peace. In the barracks, most recruits had fallen into exhausted sleep, their snores and shifting creating a symphony of restlessness. Ivory lay awake. She had trained herself long ago to function on minimal sleep, to remain alert even while appearing unconscious. It was a skill that had saved her life more times than she could count, and it was a skill she could not seem to turn off. No matter how many years had passed, her mind wandered to the day's events, cataloging threats, evaluating personnel, running scenarios. Brick was dangerous in the way that all small men with power were dangerous.
using authority to mask insecurity. Flynn was capable but limited, his expertise confined to textbook knowledge that had never been tested in actual combat. Garnett was the most problematic, a bureaucrat who confused paperwork with leadership. And then there was Hugo. Ivory's jaw tightened. The master sergeant had seen something, recognized something. That was a complication she had not anticipated. Her cover identity was solid, backed by years of carefully constructed evidence, but some things could not be hidden from those who knew what to look for.
The way she moved, the way she held herself, the thousand small cues that separated those who had merely trained for combat from those who had lived it. She would need to be more careful. A floorboard creaked at the far end of the barracks, and Ivory's entire body went still. Her breathing did not change. Her position did not shift, but every sense she possessed oriented toward that sound. Footsteps, light, deliberate, someone trying not to be heard. Through slitted eyes, she watched a figure move through the darkness. Raven, the younger woman, was making her way toward Ivory's bunk, something clutched in her hand. Ivory waited. Raven reached the foot of her bed and paused, looking down at what she believed was a sleeping woman. Then, with exaggerated care, she began to unzip Ivory's footlocker. "Whatever you're doing," Ivory said quietly, "I suggest you stop." Raven jumped back so violently that she nearly fell. "How did you know I was? I'm a light sleeper." Ivory sat up slowly, her movements deliberately unthreatening. "Go back to bed, Private. Whatever you had planned, it's not worth it." "I wasn't planning anything." Raven's voice had taken on a defensive edge. "I was just checking that you'd properly secured your equipment, making sure you didn't forget anything that might make us all look bad tomorrow." At 0200 hours, I couldn't sleep. Ivory regarded her for a long moment. In the darkness, with the moonlight casting strange shadows through the windows, Raven looked younger than her years. There was fear beneath the bravado, insecurity beneath the aggression. Ivory had seen it 100 times before in 100 different faces, in 100 different wars. "Your father was a Marine," Ivory said. It was not a question. Raven stiffened. "What about it? He taught you how to shoot, how to handle a weapon. Probably started when you were young." Ivory tilted her head slightly. "Let me guess. He pushed you hard, expected perfection, never quite satisfied no matter how well you performed." "You don't know anything about my father. I know that you came here to prove something to him, or maybe to prove something to yourself." Ivory's voice remained calm, steady. "And I know that picking on someone you see as weaker than yourself isn't going to accomplish either of those things." For a moment something cracked in Raven's composure. Her eyes glistened in the darkness, and her hands trembled at her side. Then the moment passed, and the armor snapped back into place. "Whatever," Raven muttered. "Just stay out of my way, old woman. Next time I won't be so nice." She stalked back to her bunk, and soon her breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, or a convincing imitation of. Ivory lay back down, her eyes open, watching the ceiling. In some ways, she thought, the battles we fight against ourselves are the hardest ones of all. The firing range at Fort Bragg sprawled across several acres of carefully maintained grounds, with target lanes extending from 50 to 1,000 meters. The morning had dawned clear and hot, perfect conditions for the evaluation that would determine which recruits showed promise and which needed additional work. 50 recruits stood in formation as Flynn surveyed them with undisguised skepticism. "Today," he announced, "we separate the soldiers from the tourists. Basic marksmanship evaluation. You will fire 3 rounds at targets positioned at 100, 200 and 300 meters." He paused, letting the distances sink in. "Minimum passing score is 70%. Anyone who fails will repeat basic weapons training. Anyone who embarrasses me will wish they had never been born." His eyes found Ivory in the formation. "Some of you have already demonstrated your limitations," he continued pointedly. "Today, those limitations become official." The recruits moved to their assigned lanes, collecting their weapons from the armorers. Ivory noted that Flynn personally supervised her equipment issue, selecting a rifle that had seen better days. "This one seems appropriate for your skill level," he said, pressing it into her hand. "Not that it will matter much. Ivory examined the weapon with apparent clumsiness, turning it over, squinting at the sights. What she actually did was assess every component, every flaw, every deviation from specification. The barrel showed microscopic wear that would affect accuracy at distance. The trigger had been adjusted improperly, adding an extra pound of pressure before release. The scope was slightly loose, not enough to be immediately obvious, but enough to throw shots off target by a predictable amount. A challenge, but not an impossible one. Raven took her position 2 lanes down, working through her pre-firing routine with the confident efficiency her father had drilled into her. Amber and Crystal flanked her at adjacent stations, feeding off their leader's energy. "Watch this, ladies," Raven announced. "I'll show you how a real Marine's daughter handles business." She fired her first string, the rifle's report echoing across the range. At 100 meters, her grouping was tight. At 200, slightly wider, but still respectable. At 300, she maintained control, her final score appearing on the electronic display. 23 out of 30. "That's how it's done." Flynn nodded approvingly. "Private Raven, excellent work. That's a 77% score, well above pass." Raven basked in the praise, making sure to catch Ivory's eye as she returned to the formation. "Your turn, Grandma. Try not to hurt yourself." Ivory stepped up to the firing line. Around her the range fell quiet. Even those who had already shot found themselves watching, drawn by the sight of the older woman with the poorly maintained rifle. She settled into a prone position. Her body moved with an awkwardness that seemed genuine, elbows not quite right, shoulders slightly misaligned. She raised the weapon to her eye and her finger found the trigger. Then she hesitated. The hesitation lasted only a fraction of a second, imperceptible to most observers. But in that fraction her breathing changed. Her heart rate dropped, her pupils dilated slightly, and the world narrowed to a single point of focus. She fired. The first round struck high and right. The second struck low and left. The third was closer to center but still off. At 100 meters, her grouping was abysmal. Someone laughed. Someone else muttered something about wasted ammunition. Ivory moved to 200 meters. Her shots showed no improvement. 3 rounds, 3 misses, 3 more data points in the pattern she was building. Flynn stepped closer, shaking his head. "This is painful to watch. Just finish up so we can move on." 300 meters. Ivory lay prone, her cheek pressed against the stock, her eye aligned with the scope she knew was slightly off-center. She fired. 1, 2, 3, 18 out of 30, 60% failed, Flynn announced, brimming with grim satisfaction. "Minimum score is 70%. You'll report for remedial training tomorrow at 0500 hours. "Yes, Technical Sergeant." Ivory rose and walked back to the formation. Her face showed appropriate disappointment. Her posture suggested defeat. But in the observation tower overlooking the range, Master Sergeant Hugo lowered his binoculars with a troubled expression. "Colonel Edwin," he said quietly. Edwin looked up from his tablet. "Yes, Master Sergeant. I want you to look at something." Hugo handed over the binoculars. "Look at the target at 300 meters. Lane 12. That's the recruit who just failed." Edwin raised the binoculars, adjusting the focus. "What am I looking at?" "The shot pattern. Tell me what you see." A long pause. Then Edwin lowered the binoculars, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "That's not random grouping." "No, it's not." Hugo took the binoculars back. "Every miss is exactly 4 inches from center. Same angle, same distance. The only way to be that consistently wrong is to be doing it on purpose." "You think she deliberately failed?" "I think," Hugo said slowly, "that woman isn't missing. She's calibrating." Edwin frowned. "For what?" But Hugo had no answer. "Not yet." The afternoon brought more evaluations, more opportunities for failure, more chances for Ivory to demonstrate the incompetence that had become her defining characteristic. She struggled through obstacle courses, hesitated during tactical exercises, fumbled with equipment that should have been second nature, and with each failure, those watching began to dismiss her entirely, all except for a few. General Silas received Colonel Edwin's report at 1600 hours,
exactly on schedule. He read it in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. The Pentagon liaison finally responded. Edwin explained. Her file has classified sections that require clearance above my level. Above yours, actually. Silas looked up sharply. I'm a 2-star general. What clearance could possibly be higher than mine for a basic recruit's file? That's the interesting parts. The response indicated that the classified sections relate to a unit designation that was officially disbanded in 2009. Edwin paused. Ghost Unit 7. Something shifted in Silas's expression. The color drained from his face, and for a moment, he looked like a man who had seen a phantom. Say that again. Ghost Unit 7, sir. According to the Pentagon, I know what Ghost Unit 7 was. Silas's voice had gone very quiet. I know exactly what they were. The question is how that designation ended up attached to a 34-year-old woman pretending to be a failed recruit on my base. He stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, the parade ground was emptying as recruits headed for the evening meal. Somewhere among them was a woman who might or might not be connected to the most legendary covert operations unit in modern military history. Sir, Edwin prompted, what do you want me to do? Silas did not turn around. His voice when he spoke was barely above a whisper. Ghost Unit 7 was a sniper team, Black Ops. The missions they ran are still classified, but I know some of them because they saved my life. He paused. Fallujah, 2007. My convoy was ambushed. 3 enemy snipers had us pinned down. We were dead. All of us, including my son. Edwin said nothing. He had never heard the general speak of that day. Then the shooting started. Not from the enemy, from somewhere else. Somewhere high. 3 snipers eliminated in less than 5 seconds. Perfect shots. Impossible shot. Silas's hand touched the glass, leaving a faint print. We never saw who saved us. All we found afterward was a challenge coin with the number 7 and a pair of wings. Ghost Unit 7. Their call sign was Angel. Silas turned back to face Edwin, the team leader, the shooter who made those impossible kills. She was declared killed in action. 2009. IED in Kandahar. We held a memorial. I attended it. Sir, are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. Silas's jaw tightened. I'm ordering a full investigation. I want to know everything about that woman, every record, every photograph, every piece of evidence that exists, and I want it done quietly. And if she is who you think she is, Silas was silent for a long moment. Then I need to know why someone who was supposed to be dead for 15 years is suddenly very much alive on my base. In the mess hall, Ivory ate her dinner alone. Asher had tried to join her again, but she had gently discouraged him. Too much association with her would mark him as a target. And he seemed like a good kid, one of the few who might actually make something of themselves in this place. The food was standard military fare, bland, but nutritious. She consumed it mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Hugo had noticed too much. Edwin had been watching with suspicious intensity, and Silas, whatever he suspected, was clearly digging deeper than she had anticipated. Her cover was holding, but just barely. Perhaps it was time to consider alternatives. Mind if I The voice startled her, though she did not show it. She looked up to find a young man standing across the table, tray in hand. Private Caleb, according to his uniform. She recognized him from the barracks, one of the quieter recruits who seemed to fade into the background. Free country, she said, echoing her response to Asher from the day before. Caleb sat down, arranging his food with the careful precision of someone raised in a military household. I'm Caleb, he said. I don't think we've been formally introduced. Ivory, I know. He took a bite of his meal, chewing thoughtfully. Everyone knows your name. You're kind of famous around here. The woman who keeps failing everything. Seems about right. The thing is, Caleb continued, I've been watching you and something doesn't add up. Ivory's expression did not change. What do you mean? You fail everything, but you fail it the same way every time. Same mistakes, same hesitations, same excuses. He leaned forward slightly. I grew up around soldiers. My dad is career military. I know what real incompetence looks like. And this isn't it. Maybe I'm just consistently bad. Maybe. Caleb shrugged. Or maybe you're so good that you can fake being bad with perfect accuracy. He paused. Either way, it's interesting. Ivory studied him with new attention. There was something familiar about his features, something that tugged at a memory she could not quite grasp. Who's your father? She asked. General Silas, commander of this base. Caleb waited for her reaction. Most people look nervous when they find out. You didn't even blink. Should I be nervous? I don't know. Should you? They sat in silence for a moment, two people with secrets weighing the other's trustworthiness. I was in a convoy once, Caleb said finally. A long time ago. I was just a kid, maybe 7 years old. We were ambushed. I remember hiding under a seat, crying for my mom. Everyone thought we were going to die. Ivory's hand tightened slightly on her fork. What happened? Someone saved us. Dad never talks about it, but I heard the stories. A sniper, someone who took out the enemy in seconds, then disappeared. Caleb's eyes met hers. They called them an angel. The word hung in the air between them. Interesting story, Ivory said quietly. Isn't it? Caleb stood gathering his tray. Well, I should get back. Early morning tomorrow. He paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're as incompetent as you pretend to be. And I think whatever you're doing here, you have your reasons. He walked away, leaving Ivory alone with a meal that had gone cold and a past that refused to stay buried. The medical examination was supposed to be routine. Every recruit underwent it, a standard health screening to ensure they were physically capable of continuing training. Dr. Fern conducted these examinations with professional efficiency, having processed hundreds of soldiers over her career. Ivory sat on the examination table, waiting for the standard battery of tests. Remove your shirt, please, Dr. Fern instructed. I need to check your spine and shoulders for alignment issues. Ivory hesitated for just a fraction of a second before complying. Dr. Fern's hands moved along her spine with practiced ease, checking for abnormalities, documenting range of motion. Then she stopped. These scars, she said quietly, on your lower back, what are they from? Car accident, Ivory replied. Several years ago. Dr. Fern said nothing for a moment. Her fingers traced the pattern of scar tissue, the way it radiated outward from a central point, the distinctive fragmentation marks that no automobile collision could ever produce. Must have been quite an accident, she finally said. It was. The thing is, Dr. Fern continued, I served as a field surgeon at Lonto Regional Medical Center for 3 years. I've seen hundreds of injuries from car accidents. She paused. I've also seen hundreds of injuries from IED blasts. The scarring patterns are very different. Ivory turned her head slightly, meeting the doctor's eyes. These scars, Dr. Fern said quietly, are not from any car accident. This is shrapnel damage, fragmentation from an improvised explosive device. Unless I miss my guess. Your guess might be wrong. It might be. Dr. Fern stepped back, making notations in her file. Or it might not be. Either way, I'm not going to push. Everyone who comes through here has their own story. Some of those stories are classified. She closed the file. But for what it's worth, whoever stitched you up did excellent work. Field medicine at its finest. You're lucky to be alive. I know, Ivory said quietly. Believe me, I know. The evening had brought a shift in the weather, clouds rolling in from the west to obscure the stars. In the barracks, most recruits had settled into the uneasy rest of those expecting another brutal day ahead. Brick had other plans. On your feet, he bellowed, slamming through the door at 2100 hours. All of you now. The recruits scrambled from their bunks, confusion and fear warring on their faces. Brick strode down the aisle until he reached Ivory's position. You, he said, jabbing a finger at her chest. Outside, now. What's this about, drill sergeant? Someone asked. Did I give you permission to speak? Brick roared. Everyone back in your bunks. This is between me and Grandma here. Outside, the evening air was thick with humidity and the promise of rain. Brick led Ivory to the small courtyard behind the barracks, a space used for overflow equipment storage and apparently private confrontations. I've been in this army for 18 years, Brick began, his voice low and dangerous. I've trained thousands of recruits. I've sent men and women to fight and die for this country. And in all that time, I've developed certain instincts. Ivory stood at attention, her expression neutral. Those instincts are telling me something about you. Brick began to circle her slowly. Something's off. Everyone else sees a failure, a joke, an old woman who doesn't belong. But I see something else. What do you see? Drill Sergeant. Control. Brick stopped directly in front of her. You're too controlled. Every mistake is the same. Every failure is measured. You're not struggling. You're performing. He stepped closer. Who are you really? I'm a recruit, Drill Sergeant. Nothing more. Wrong answer. Without warning, Brick threw a punch. It was not meant to land. Not really. It was a test. A way to gauge reactions. To see what lay beneath the carefully constructed surface. Ivory's response was instantaneous. Her hand came up in a block that redirected his fist away from her face with minimal effort. Her body shifting into a stance that no administrative assistant should ever have learned. For one frozen moment, they stared at each other. Then Ivory deliberately stumbled backward, her hands coming up in a defensive position that was all wrong, her expression shifting to appropriate fear. Drill Sergeant. I save it. Brick's eyes had narrowed to slits. That block. For half a second you moved like someone who's done this before. Not trained, not practiced, but lived. He stepped back, reassessing. I don't know what your game is, but I intend to find out. He turned and walked away, leaving Ivory alone in the courtyard. She stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly released a breath she did not realize she had been holding. The mask had slipped just for an instant, but it had slipped and Brick had seen. In the shadows at the corner of the building, another figure stood watching. Sergeant Major Solomon had witnessed the entire exchange, from the initial confrontation to the telling block that had revealed more than Ivory intended. His hand went to the pocket where he kept a worn challenge coin, worn smooth by years of handling, marked with the number 7 and a pair of wings. Holy cow, he whispered to himself. It can't be, but somehow impossibly. He knew it. The next morning brought the final evaluation of the week, a comprehensive assessment combining marksmanship, physical fitness, and tactical thinking. The recruits who performed well would move forward in their training. Those who failed would face additional remediation. Everyone knew where Ivory would end up. The first portion of the evaluation went as expected. Ivory performed poorly on every metric, consistently, but not egregiously, maintaining her cover with the careful precision that had defined her time on base.
Then came the 500-meter precision shooting test. Brick had insisted on including this particular challenge, ostensibly as a stretch goal for the more advanced recruits. In reality, it was designed for one purpose: to expose Ivory once and for all. This is a volunteer exercise, Flynn announced. 500 meters. Conditions are challenging. Crosswind of approximately 15 miles per hour. Target size reduced from standard. Only those who feel confident in their abilities should step forward. Raven volunteered immediately, her competitive nature unable to resist the challenge. Several other recruits followed, those with family military backgrounds or personal shooting experience. No one expected Ivory to raise her hand. I'd like to try, she said quietly. The range fell silent. You. Flynn's eyebrows rose. You failed the 300-meter test yesterday. What makes you think you can handle 500? I'd like to try, Ivory repeated. Flynn looked to Brick, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Fine, Flynn said. Step up to the line. As Ivory moved into position, she felt the weight of every eye on the range: recruits, instructors, and somewhere behind her she sensed the presence of observers she could not see. Since this is a special circumstance, Flynn continued, you may select your own weapon from those available. A collection of rifles had been laid out for the volunteers, standard issue M4s, a few precision variants, and at the end, almost as an afterthought, a Barrett .50 caliber. Ivory walked the line, examining each weapon with apparent uncertainty. Her hands hovered over the M4s, the obvious choice for someone of her demonstrated ability level. Then they settled on the Barrett. Laughter erupted from the assembled recruits. Is she serious? Raven snorted. That thing weighs more than she does. Let her embarrass herself, Amber agreed. This should be good. Ivory lifted the Barrett with an effort that seemed genuine. The rifle was massive, designed for anti-material and extreme long-range work, wielded typically by large men with extensive training. She carried it to the firing line and lowered herself into a prone position. And everything changed. The awkwardness vanished. Her body settled into an alignment that was not taught in any basic training manual. An Argon fusion of sniper and rifle that spoke of thousands of hours behind similar weapons. Her breathing slowed to a measured rhythm, her heart rate dropping to a level that most people only achieved in deep meditation. Her finger found the trigger. 3 shots. 3 reports that echoed across the range like thunder. 3 impacts that could not possibly have been made by a failed recruit with a borrowed rifle. The electronic scoring system registered the results with cold precision. 3 bullseyes. Center mass. 500 meters. 15 miles per hour crosswind. Perfect shots. Impossible shots. The range fell absolutely silent. Then Sergeant Major Solomon stepped forward, his face pale beneath his tan. Angel. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. You're supposed to be dead. Brick moved before anyone could react, grabbing Ivory's shoulder and spinning her around. I knew it, he snarled. I knew something was. His grip on her shirt was too tight. The fabric, already stressed from days of intense training, gave way. The tear exposed her left shoulder, and on that shoulder, inked in precise lines, was a symbol that several people on the range recognized immediately. The number 7, a pair of wings, a skull beneath them. Ghost Unit 7. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, no one breathed. Then the sound began. Whispers at first, then louder, spreading through the assembled recruits like wildfire. Ghost Unit, that's the Black Ops team, the sniper unit that was killed in There's No Way. Look at the tattoo. It's real. Solomon pushed through the crowd, his eyes fixed on Ivory's face. Fallujah, he said, his voice shaking. August 2007. My squad was pinned down. We called for support, but none came. Then someone started shooting from the rooftops. 3 enemy snipers dead in seconds. He reached into his pocket and produced a worn challenge coin. When it was over, this fell from the sky, landed right at my feet. Ivory looked at the coin, at the man holding it, at the trembling in his hands. I remember that rooftop, she said quietly. You were the one carrying the wounded man. I had to wait until you were clear of the sight line before I could take the shot. Solomon's knees buckled. Hugo caught him before he hit the ground. It's her, Solomon whispered. All these years I never knew it was her. The crowd parted suddenly, creating a path from the range entrance. General Silas walked through, his stride measured, his expression unreadable. Colonel Edwin followed close behind, tablet in hand, his face showing the strain of recent discovery. Silas stopped 3 feet from Ivory, the woman who had been failing every test, the woman who had just made 3 impossible shots, the woman with a tattoo that should have died with her 15 years ago. Fallujah, he said. August 12, 2007. 1700 hours. Ivory met his eyes. Your convoy was ambushed en route Irish. 3 enemy snipers had the overwatch positions. Standard IED distraction with interlocking fields of fire. My son was in that convoy. Silas's voice cracked slightly. He was 7 years old. We were evacuating him to a safer area. Instead, we drove straight into an ambush. I know, 3 snipers. You eliminated them in 4.2 seconds. I know because I counted. Silas stepped closer. The army held a memorial for you in 2000. They told us you died in an IED strike in Kandahar. They said there wasn't enough left to send home. The memorial was necessary, sir. Ivory's voice remained calm, though something flickered behind her eyes. The people hunting Ghost Unit needed to believe we were gone. It was the only way to protect our families. Families. Silas's expression shifted. You gave up everything. Your name, your identity, your recognition, so that others could be safe. It was my job, sir. Nothing more. Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he came to attention. His hand rose in a salute that carried the full weight of military tradition, of honor, of debts that could never be fully repaid. "Sergeant First Class Willow," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent rain. "Call sign, Angel. Ghost Unit 7. 47 confirmed kills. Recipient of the Medal of Honor, classification level above top secret." Around them 100 recruits and a dozen instructors stood in stunned disbelief. The woman they had mocked. The woman they had dismissed. The woman they had called old, weak, useless. A legend. "You didn't just save my convoy," Silas continued, his voice rougher now. "You saved my son, my boy. He had a red backpack that day. He was crying for his mother, and you made sure he got home." From somewhere in the formation, a choked sound emerged. Private Caleb had pushed to the front of the crowd, his face white with shock. "I was 7, he said, the words barely audible. "The convoy attack, the one Dad never talks about." His eyes found Ivory's. "That was you. You saved me." Ivory looked at the young man who had sat across from her at dinner, who had sensed something wrong with her story, who had spoken of angels without knowing one stood before him. "You had a red backpack," she said quietly. "You were crying for your mom. I couldn't let anything happen to you." Caleb's legs gave out. General Silas caught his son before he could fall, holding him upright as tears streamed down both their faces. Around them, the world held its breath. Brick stood frozen, his face a mask of horror as the implications of his behavior crashed down upon him. The insults, the punishment runs, the midnight confrontation. He had done all of that to a Medal of Honor recipient. To someone who had saved his commanding officer's family. His career flashed before his eyes. "Sir," he started, his voice cracking. "I didn't know, I was just doing my job." Silas did not look at him, did not acknowledge his existence. His attention remained fixed on Ivory. "Why?" he asked simply. "You were dead, you were safe. Why come back?" Ivory was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the range. "Because soldiers don't stop being soldiers, sir. We just find different wars to fight." She paused. "And because some debts can't be paid from the grave." The weight of those words settled over the assembly like a physical thing. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. The storm that had been building all day finally ready to break. But no one moved. No one spoke. They simply stood, bearing witness to the return of a ghost. Raven stepped forward, her earlier confidence shattered. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know, the things I said. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with respect." Ivory's voice was not unkind, but it carried the weight of a lesson that Raven would never forget. "That's the point. You should treat everyone as if they might be carrying wounds you can't see. Medals you'll never know about. Sacrifices that make your worst day look like a vacation." Raven nodded, unable to speak. Amber and Crystal flanked her, their own expressions showing the same devastating realization. Flynn approached next, his trademark swagger notably absent. "Ma'am," he said. And the single word contained more respect than all his previous pronouncements combined. "I've trained snipers for 15 years. I've worked with some of the best shooters in the world." He gestured toward the 500-meter target. "I've never seen anyone shoot like that, not ever." "The weapon was well maintained," Ivory said simply. "And the wind was cooperative." A surprised laugh escaped from someone in the crowd, then another. The tension that had gripped the range began to fracture, replaced by something warmer, something approaching awe. Garnet pushed through, tablet forgotten in his hand. "Ma'am, I apologize for questioning your presence here. I should have trusted. You should have trusted the process." Ivory finished for him. "I know you weren't wrong to be skeptical. Your job is to evaluate, to challenge, to question. The mistake wasn't in your suspicion. It was in your assumption that age and appearance tell you everything you need to know about someone." Garnet nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "I won't make that mistake again." The rain began to fall, fat drops that struck the ground with increasing intensity. No one moved to seek shelter. They stood there getting wet, waiting for whatever came next. General Silas finally released his salute,
His eyes remained on Ivory's face, searching for something. "The army needs instructors," he said. "Not I'm offering you a position at the sniper school, teaching the next generation, passing on what you know." Ivory considered this for a long moment. "I came back to serve, sir, whatever form that takes." "Then serve here openly, with the recognition you deserve." Silas paused. "You've been hiding long enough, Sergeant. It's time to come home." The rain intensified, but still no one moved. Hugo stepped forward, reaching into his pocket. He produced a challenge coin worn smooth by years of handling, and pressed it into Ivory's hand. "This fell from a rooftop in Fallujah," he said. "I've carried it every day since. I always wondered who threw it." His voice thickened. "Now I know." Ivory looked down at the coin. Her fingers, which had been steady through everything, trembled slightly. "I remember that throw," she said quietly. "I watched you carry Sergeant Morrison to safety. 60 pounds of gear, plus a 200-pound wounded man. 300 meters under fire." She met Hugo's eyes. "I couldn't help with the carrying, but I could make sure you got there." "You did." Hugo's voice cracked. "You did more than you know." The recruits had formed a loose semicircle around the central figures, witnesses to a reunion that none of them would ever forget. Some had pulled out phones, recording despite the rain. Others simply stood, absorbing the magnitude of what they were seeing. Asher pushed to the front of the crowd. "I knew it," he said, a smile breaking through his shock. "I knew there was something about you. The way you moved, the way you watched everything. My uncle would have recognized it immediately." "Your uncle is Special Forces," Ivory said. It was not a question. He died in 2011, Kandahar. Asher paused. "He used to talk about the ghost stories, the sniper team that appeared from nowhere, saved impossible situations, then vanished. We thought they were legends." "Legends don't bleed," Ivory replied quietly. "We bled plenty." The rain began to ease, the storm passing as quickly as it had come. Shafts of late afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the wet parade ground in gold and silver. Dr. Fern appeared at the edge of the group. "I knew those scars weren't from any car accident," she said. "Shrapnel patterns from an IED, field surgery scars, signs of multiple combat injuries." She shook her head slowly. "What I don't understand is how you're still standing, let alone shooting like that." "Stubbornness," Ivory said simply. "And good medical care." She met the doctor's eyes. "The person who put me back together knew what they were doing. I'd like to meet them someday." "You can't. He died getting me to the extraction point." For the first time, genuine pain flickered across Ivory's face. "A lot of good people died so that I could stand here today. That's not something I ever forget." The mention of death brought a somber note back to the gathering. Heroes did not exist in isolation. For every legendary save, there were prices paid in blood and lives, and years of silence. Silas cleared his throat. "I think we've all had enough drama for one day. Colonel Edwin, please see that proper quarters are arranged for Sergeant Willow. Officer housing. She's no longer a recruit." "Yes, sir." "And Brick." Silas finally turned to the drill sergeant, who had been standing frozen in place since the revelation. "Report to my office at 0600 tomorrow. Bring your transfer papers." Brick's face crumpled. "Sir, please, I was just doing my job." "I didn't. Your job was to train soldiers, not to break them." Silas's voice could have frozen fire. "You spent a week trying to destroy someone who has done more for this country than you'll accomplish in your entire career. There will be consequence." Brick opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "Ma'am," his voice came out strangled as he turned to Ivory. "I apologize. He stopped, seeming to realize that no words could possibly be adequate. Instead, he simply saluted, holding the gesture until Ivory returned it. Then he walked away, and everyone knew his career at Fort Bragg was over. The crowd began to disperse, recruits and instructors alike moving toward shelter as the last of the rain faded. But the conversations that would spread through the base, the stories that would be told and retold, those were just beginning. Solomon remained behind, still staring at Ivory as if afraid she might vanish. All these years, he said, I carried that coin every day. I told myself that someday I'd find out who saved us, that I'd get the chance to say thank you. He shook his head. I never imagined it would be like this. Life rarely goes the way we imagine. Ivory replied. That's what makes it interesting. Interesting, Solomon laughed, a sound that held equal parts joy and disbelief. You know what? For the first time in a long time, I think you might be right. The sunset painted Fort Bragg in shades of orange and purple, the storm clouds retreating to reveal a sky scrubbed clean by the rain. In her new quarters, considerably more spacious than the barracks bunk she had occupied for the past week, Ivory stood at the window and watched the light fade. Behind her the door stood open. Caleb had followed her from the range, seemingly unable to let her out of his sight. I don't know what to say, he admitted. All my life Dad had nightmares about that day. He'd wake up screaming about ambushes and gunfire and not being able to protect me. I never understood why he couldn't let it go. Because he's a father, Ivory said, without turning. And fathers are supposed to protect their children. When they can't, it haunts them. But you protected me, you were there. I was doing my job. It was more than a job. Caleb moved to stand beside her at the window. You could have let us. It would have been easier, safer for you. Instead, you took on 3 enemy snipers from an exposed position, gave away your location, and saved a convoy full of strangers. You weren't strangers. Ivory finally turned to face him. You were soldiers, civilians, a father and his son. You were the reason we fought. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Will you tell me about it someday? About that day? About the unit? Some of it. Ivory's expression softened slightly. Not all. Some things need to stay buried. But the parts that matter, the parts that explain why we did what we did. Yes, someday. I'd like that. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. 2 people connected by a moment of violence. 15 years passed, finally able to acknowledge the thread that bound them. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Master Sergeant Hugo stood in the hallway, his expression troubled. Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see. Ivory followed him to the communications center where Colonel Edwin was already waiting. On the main screen, a photograph was displayed. A grainy image that appeared to have been taken from a surveillance camera. This came in 20 minutes ago, Edwin explained. Encrypted channel, no return address. The photograph showed a woman, middle-aged, familiar features, though aged by time and circumstance. Beneath the image, a single line of text. The ghosts are gathering. Someone is watching. Ivory's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Who sent this? She asked. We don't know yet. We're working on tracing the origin, but whoever did this knows what they're doing. The encryption is military grade. Better than military grade. Ivory studied the photograph. The woman in the image, whoever she was, bore a striking resemblance to someone she had known. Someone who had been listed among the dead of Ghost Unit 7. Sergeant Willow, Hugo's voice cut through her thoughts. Do you recognize this person? For a long moment, Ivory did not answer. I might, she finally said. I need to make a call. Hugo and Edwin exchanged glances, but did not press. They left her alone in the communications center, the mysterious photograph still glowing on the screen. Ivory reached for the secure phone on the desk. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad. 15 years of silence. 15 years of believing she was the only one left. 15 years of carrying the weight of being the last ghost. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. The phone connected on the 3rd ring. Hello. The voice on the other end was electronically distorted, but something about its cadence was achingly familiar. This is Angel, Ivory said. Someone sent me a photograph. A pause, then. You weren't supposed to come back. The graves were there for a reason. I know, but some wars can't be fought from the shadows. Another pause, longer this time. The others are still out there. Some of them found peace, others never will. And now someone is hunting us. Who? That's what we need to find out. The voice hardened. Meet me in 48 hours. You know where. Angel, watch your back. Whatever's coming, it's bigger than any of us realized. The line went dead. Ivory set down the phone and turned back to the window. Outside, Fort Bragg had settled into its nighttime routine.
Lights flickering on in barracks and offices. The sounds of military life continuing regardless of the day's revelations. She had come back to serve, to find purpose in a world that had moved on without her. Instead, she had found something else entirely. The ghosts were gathering, and somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching. The tears emerged one by one, cold and distant, keeping their own counsel. Ivory watched them appear, thinking about the people she had served with, the missions they had run, the prices they had paid. Some debts could not be repaid from the grave, but perhaps they could be repaid from the shadows. She pulled out her phone and began composing a message. There were preparations to make, contacts to reach, an old network to activate. 15 years ago, Ghost Unit 7 had died so that others might live. Tonight it seemed the dead were coming back, and whatever was hunting them had no idea what it had awakened. The morning after the revelation dawned gray and cold, a stark contrast to the emotional storm that had swept through Fort Bragg the previous day. Ivory stood at the window of her new quarters, watching the base come alive with the mechanical precision of military routine. But nothing was routine anymore. Word had spread through the installation like wildfire. The mess halls buzzed with whispered conversation. The training grounds echoed with recruits retelling the story to anyone who would listen. By 0600 hours, there was not a single person on Fort Bragg who did not know the name Angel. A knock at her door pulled Ivory from her thoughts. Enter. Sergeant Major Solomon stepped inside, his weathered face carrying an expression that mixed reverence with something approaching pain. He held 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Ivory with a hand that trembled slightly. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "I thought we might talk properly this time." Ivory accepted the coffee, gesturing toward the small sitting area. "I wondered when you would come." They sat across from each other, the silence between them filled with 15 years of questions unasked and answers unspoken. Solomon studied her face as though memorizing every line, every shadow, every sign of the years that had passed since Fallujah. "When they told us you died," he began slowly, "I didn't believe it, not at first. You were too good, too careful. The idea that an IED could take out Angel seemed impossible. It nearly did." Ivory's voice remained level, but something flickered behind her eyes. "The device was bigger than we expected. I lost 3 teammates in the initial blast. Doc Martinez dragged me half a mile to the extraction point before the secondary teams arrived." Martinez. Solomon's expression shifted. "I knew him. Good man. The best." Ivory took a sip of her coffee. "He died getting me out. Took a round meant for me while carrying my stretcher. I was unconscious. I didn't even get to say goodbye." The weight of that admission hung in the air between them. Soldiers understood sacrifice in ways civilians never could. They understood that survival was not always a gift. Sometimes it was a burden. "Why the cover-up?" Solomon asked. "Why let everyone think you were dead?" "Because we had made enemies." Ivory set down her cup. Ghost Unit 7 operated in places that officially did not exist against targets that were never supposed to be named. We were effective, which made us dangerous, and dangerous people attract dangerous attention. Someone was hunting you. Someone is still hunting us. Ivory's gaze sharpened. "That's why I came back. That's why I couldn't stay buried anymore." Solomon leaned forward. "The photograph. The one Colonel Edwin showed you. Who was it?" Ivory was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Her name was Iris. Call sign Spectre. She was our intelligence specialist. Best analyst I ever worked with." Ivory paused. "She was also supposed to have died in 2010. Car accident in Germany. Closed casket funeral. But the photograph. The photograph was taken 3 days ago, in Prague." Ivory met Solomon's eyes. "Someone wanted me to know that I'm not the only ghost who came back from the dead." The implications of that statement rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. If Iris was alive, Who else might have survived? And more importantly, who was gathering them together? And why now? What are you going to do? Solomon. Ivory stood and walked back to the window. The base stretched out before her, thousands of soldiers going about their daily routines, unaware of the shadows moving at the edges of their world. I'm going to find out who's watching, she said, and I'm going to find out why. The morning's first formation brought a different energy to the parade ground. Recruits who had spent the previous week ignoring or mocking Ivory now watched her with expressions ranging from awe to shame. The instructors maintained their professional demeanor, but their eyes told a different story. Raven stood at attention, her usual confidence replaced by something smaller, more uncertain. When the formation was dismissed for morning training, she approached Ivory with hesitant steps. "Ma'am," the word came out strangled. "I wanted to apologize again, properly." Ivory regarded her calmly. "You apologized yesterday. I know, but I've been thinking about it all night. The things I said, the way I treated you." Raven's voice cracked slightly. "My father always told me that the measure of a soldier isn't what they do when people are watching. It's what they do when they think no one can see. Your father sounds like a wise man." "He is." Raven swallowed hard. "And he would be ashamed of how I behaved. I was cruel because you seemed weak. I was cruel because it made me feel strong." She looked down at her boots. "That's not strength. That's just being a bully." Ivory studied the younger woman for a long moment. Behind the bravado and the sharp tongue, she could see the outlines of someone still trying to figure out who they were. Someone whose father's expectations had shaped them in ways both helpful and harmful. "You want to know something about real strength?" Ivory asked, quiet. Raven looked up, her eyes glistening. "Real strength is admitting when you were wrong. Real strength is looking at your own behavior and deciding to do better." Ivory paused. "You could have avoided me this morning. Could have pretended yesterday never happened. Instead, you're standing here facing the consequences of your actions. That takes courage." "I don't feel courageous. I feel like an idiot." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." A hint of warmth entered Ivory's voice. "The question isn't whether you made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is what you do next." Raven straightened slightly, something shifting in her expression. "I want to be better. I want to be the kind of soldier my father talks about. The kind who treats everyone with respect, regardless of what they look like or how old they are. Then be that soldier." Ivory nodded toward the training ground. "Starting now, starting today, every choice you make from this moment forward is a chance to be who you want to become." Raven saluted, crisp and proper. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." She turned and jogged toward her training group, her shoulders set with new determination. Amber and Crystal fell in beside her, and Ivory watched as Raven began speaking to them, gesturing emphatically. Whatever she was saying, both women's expressions shifted from confusion to understanding to something approaching resolve. Perhaps some lessons had been learned after all. Flynn found Ivory at the armory an hour later, supervising the weapons maintenance that had been so poorly evaluated the previous week. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her work before clearing his throat. "Technical Sergeant." Ivory did not look up from the rifle she was examining. "Something I can help you with." "I wanted to talk." Flynn entered the armory, his usual swagger notably absent. "About the evaluation, about the way I treated you. You were doing your job. I was being an arrogant fool." Flynn moved to stand beside her, looking down at the weapon in her hands. "I've been training shooters for 15 years. I thought I knew everything there was to know about marksmanship." He shook his head slowly. "Then you walked onto that range and showed me what real shooting looks like." Ivory set down the rifle. "Every shooter has something to teach. Every shooter has something to learn. The moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop improving. That's what my instructor told me back when I was starting out." Flynn's voice had dropped, thoughtful. "I forgot that somewhere along the way. Started believing my own reputation. It happens to the best of us." "Does it?" Flynn met her eyes. "Did it happen to you?" Ivory considered the question. "Once, early in my career, I thought I was unstoppable, thought I'd mastered every aspect of the craft." She paused. "Then I missed a shot that should have been routine, and because I missed, 3 good soldiers died." The admission hung in the air between them. "What did you do?" Flynn asked. "I went back to basics.
relearned everything from the ground up, approached every training session as though I knew nothing. Ivory picked up the rifle again. Humility isn't weakness. Technical Sergeant, it's the foundation of excellence. Flynn nodded slowly. General Silas mentioned that you might be taking a position at the sniper school. If that's true, I'd like to request a transfer, to learn from you, to remember what it means to be a student. That's a significant commitment. I know, Flynn straightened, but I've been coasting on reputation for too long. It's time to put in the work again. Ivory studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Submit the request. I'll make sure it's approved. Thank you, ma'am. Flynn saluted, his form perfect. I won't let you down. See that you don't. He left and Ivory returned to her work. But her mind was elsewhere, turning over the implications of what she had set in motion. Teaching, mentoring, passing on knowledge that had been earned in blood and fire. It was not the future she had imagined when she came back from the dead, but perhaps it was the future she needed. The afternoon brought a summons to General Silas's office. Ivory arrived to find the general standing at his window, much as she had stood at hers that morning, watching the base with an expression that mingled pride with something more complex. Close the door, Silas said without turning. We need to talk. Ivory complied, then stood at ease in the center of the office. Sir, I spoke with the Pentagon this morning. Silas finally turned to face her. About Ghost Unit 7. About what really happened in Kandahar. And they're still not telling me everything. A muscle twitched in Silas's jaw. 15 years and half the files are still classified above my clearance level. But I learned enough. He moved to his desk, picking up a folder that had been sitting prominently on its surface. The IED that supposedly killed your unit wasn't random. It was targeted. Someone fed your position to the enemy. Silas's voice hardened. Someone inside our own intelligence apparatus. Ivory's expression did not change, but her eyes grew colder. I suspected as much. The attack was too precise, too well timed. The investigation afterward was buried, classified, and sealed by order of someone with very high authority. Silas set down the folder. The official story became the only story. Ghost Unit 7 died heroes. End of discussion. Except some of us didn't die. No. Silas met her eyes. Some of you disappeared, went underground, created new identities and new lives. He paused. And now someone is gathering you back together. Ivory remained silent, waiting. The photograph that came in last night. Silas continued. I had my people trace the origin point. It bounced through 17 different servers across 9 countries before reaching us. Military-grade encryption, like Edwin said. But we found something else. He pulled a second photograph from the folder and slid it across the desk. This one showed a building, nondescript, somewhere in Eastern Europe based on the architecture. This facility was officially decommissioned in 2012. It was a black site used for interrogations and intelligence operations. According to the records, it's been empty for over a decade. But it's not empty, Ivory said. No, satellite imagery from 2 weeks ago shows activity. Vehicles, personnel, communications equipment. Silas's expression grew gray. Whatever's happening, whoever's behind it, they're operating from that facility. Do we know who? Not yet. But I have a theory. Silas leaned forward. Someone wanted Ghost Unit 7 dead. When the IED didn't finish the job, they let the cover story stand. Let everyone believe the unit was gone. But now something has changed. Now they're actively looking for survivors. Hunting us. Yes. Silas's voice dropped. The question is why? What do you know that makes you dangerous? What did Ghost Unit 7 see or do that someone wants to stay buried? Ivory was quiet for a long moment. Her mind traveled back through years of missions, years of operations that existed only in classified files, and the memories of those who had carried them out. There was one mission, she said slowly. 2008. We were sent to extract a high-value target from a compound in northern Pakistan. The target was supposed to be an Al-Qaeda financier. Supposed to be. When we reached the compound, we found something else. Documents, photographs, evidence of a network that extended far beyond terrorist financing. Ivory's voice grew harder. Evidence that implicated people within our own government, people who were supposed to be on our side. Silas's face had gone pale. You're saying Ghost Unit 7 stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to find. I'm saying that 2 months after we submitted our report on that mission, someone tried to kill us. Ivory met his eyes. The IED in Kandahar wasn't enemy action, General. It was a cleanup operation. The silence that followed was deafening. Do you have proof? Silas finally asked. The proof was in the report we submitted. The report that was immediately classified and sealed. Ivory paused. But I kept copies. Insurance. Hidden in places that only I know about. And the others? The other survivors? They may have kept copies too, which would explain why someone is suddenly interested in gathering us together. Ivory's expression hardened. They want to find us, interrogate us, learn what we know and what we've saved, and then they want to finish what they started 15 years ago. Silas stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. This is bigger than I thought. Bigger than Fort Bragg. Bigger than my authority. Yes, sir, it is. What do you need? The question surprised Ivory. She had expected orders, not an offer of assistance. Time, she said, and resources to investigate. If there are other survivors out there, I need to find them before our enemies do. You'll have both. Silas nodded decisively. I'll arrange for temporary duty assignment. Officially, you'll be conducting training evaluations at various installations. Unofficially, you'll be doing whatever you need to do to get to the bottom of this. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Silas's expression was grim. If what you're saying is true, we're dealing with people who have already demonstrated a willingness to kill American soldiers to protect their secrets. People with access and authority and resources. He paused. Be careful, Sergeant. I don't want to attend your memorial a second time. Neither do I, sir. Ivory left the office with a folder of documents and a head full of questions. The conspiracy she had suspected for 15 years was finally beginning to take shape. But shapes could be deceiving, and shadows hid more than they revealed. She had 48 hours before her rendezvous with whoever had sent the photograph. 48 hours to prepare for whatever was coming. It would have to be enough. The evening found Ivory at the base chapel, not for worship but for solitude. The building was empty at this hour, the pews casting long shadows in the fading light that filtered through stained glass window. She sat in the back row, her thoughts traveling to faces she had not allowed herself to remember in years. Doc Martinez, who had died carrying her to safety. Sergeant Chen, whose jokes had kept them sane during the darkest mission. Lieutenant Blackwood, whose tactical brilliance had saved their lives more times than anyone could count. And Iris, Spectre, the woman in the photograph, who should have been dead, but apparently was not. I thought I might find you here. Caleb's voice came from the door. He approached slowly, as though afraid of disturbing something sacred. My father used to come here, he continued, sliding into the pew beside her. After the convoy attack, he'd sit for hours just staring at the altar. I never understood what he was looking for. Answers, Ivory said quietly. Or maybe just peace. Did he ever find it? I don't think so. Not completely. Ivory turned to look at the young man who had been a child the last time their paths crossed. That's the thing about trauma, Caleb. It doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it differently. Caleb was silent for a moment. I have nightmares sometimes. About that day. I'm hiding under the seat and I can hear the gunfire and I know something terrible is happening. But I don't understand why. He swallowed. And then the shooting stops and there's this silence that's somehow worse than the noise. The silence is when you realize you're still alive, Ivory said, and that others might not be. Is that what it was like for you in Kandahar? The question hung in the air between them. Ivory considered deflecting, offering some platitude about the nature of combat. But Caleb deserved better than that. Kandahar was different, she said. Finally, the IED went off without warning. One moment we were moving through a village.
The next moment the world was fire and noise and pain. She paused. I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital. They told me my team was dead, all of them, and that I should have died too. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Ivory's voice grew distant. Sometimes I wonder why I survived when they didn't. What I'm supposed to do with the time I was given. Caleb turned to face her fully. Maybe this is what you're supposed to do, being here, teaching. showing people like me that there's more to being a soldier than what we see in movies and recruitment videos. Maybe Ivory allowed herself a small smile, or maybe I'm just too stubborn to stay dead. The chapel fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now. Two people connected by circumstances beyond their control, finding common ground in the aftermath of shared trauma. I want to help, Caleb said suddenly. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're investigating, I want to be part of it. This isn't a training exercise. The people I'm dealing with are dangerous. I know. Caleb's jaw set with a determination that reminded Ivory of his father. But you saved my life once. Maybe it's time I started repaying that debt. Ivory studied him for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Caleb was young, inexperienced, emotionally invested. All of those things could be liabilities, but he was also motivated, capable, and connected to General Silas in ways that might prove useful. I can't make any promises, she said finally, but I'll keep you informed. If there's something you can do to help, I'll let you know. That's all I'm asking. They sat together as the last light faded from the windows. Two generations of soldiers united by a single act of violence and the ripples it had sent through both their lives. The night brought dream. Ivory rarely slept deeply enough to dream, but exhaustion and emotional upheaval had lowered her defenses. She found herself back in Kandahar, moving through the village with her team, the Afghan sun beating down on their patrol. Everything was as she remembered it. The dusty streets, the curious faces of children watching from doorways, the tension that never quite faded, no matter how many missions they completed. Then the IED. In the dream, time stretched like taffy. She saw the device before it detonated, a shape buried beneath the road that should not have been there. She opened her mouth to shout a warning, but no sound emerged. The explosion lifted her off her feet, and suddenly she was floating through fire and debris, watching her teammates fall in slow motion. Doc Martinez reaching for her, even as shrapnel tore through his body. Sergeant Chen thrown against a wall with bone-breaking force. Lieutenant Blackwood disappearing in a cloud of smoke and flame. And through it all, a voice whispering words she could not quite hear. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ghosts are gathering. Someone is watching. Ivory woke with a gasp, her hand automatically reaching for a weapon that was not there. The darkness of her quarters pressed in around her, broken only by the faint glow of electronics and the distant lights of the base outside her window. A phone was ringing. She grabbed it, checking the display. Unknown number. Encrypted connection. Angel. The electronically distorted voice from the previous night. Change of plans. The timeline has accelerated. Ivory swung her legs out of bed, instantly alert. What happened? 3 of our people were taken last night. Prague, Berlin, and Seoul. Coordinated operation. Professional extraction teams. The voice paused. They're not just watching anymore. They're moving. Who was taken? Spectre, Wraith, and Shadow. Names that meant nothing to most people, but everything to Ivory. 3 of the 7 who survived Kandahar. That leaves 4. That leaves you, me, Ghost, and Prophet. The voice hardened, and whoever is behind this just announced that they know where we are. Ivory moved to the window, scanning the darkness outside. Nothing seemed out of place, but that meant little. Professional surveillance was invisible by definition. Where do we meet? Negative. A meeting is too risky now. We need to go dark, scatter, make ourselves impossible to find, and leave the others. The others are already gone. Pain flickered through the electronic distortion. They'll be interrogated. They'll give up whatever they know, and then they'll be eliminated. Same as the plan in Kandahar. Ivory's grip tightened on the phone. I'm not running. I'm not leaving them behind. Then you're going to die. The voice was flat. Sir, these people have resources we can't match. Intelligence we can't access. They've had 15 years to prepare for this moment. And I've had 15 years to prepare for them. A long pause. What are you planning? Ivory looked out at the sleeping base, at the thousands of soldiers who had no idea what was happening in the shadows around them. Then she thought about the documents hidden in her secret caches, the evidence that had nearly gotten her killed once before. I'm planning to end this, she said once and for all. You're crazy. Probably. Ivory allowed herself a grim smile, but I'm also the best sniper who ever lived, and I'm done hiding. The morning of her departure came too quickly. Ivory stood in General Silas's office, receiving her official orders and the unofficial blessing of a man who understood what she was about to attempt. The resources I promised are in place, Silas said. Safe houses in 6 countries, communication protocols that bypass normal channels, and a contact at the CIA who owes me a significant favor. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Silas's expression was grave. Just come back alive and bring our people home if you can. Ivory nodded, accepting the weight of that responsibility. I'll do my best, sir. I know you will. Silas extended his hand. Good luck, Sergeant, and Godspeed. She shook it, feeling the firm grip of a man who had seen too many soldiers leave on dangerous missions. Some had returned, others had not. Both outcomes left marks that never fully healed. Hugo and Solomon were waiting outside along with a small group of those whose lives had been touched by the previous day's revelation. Asher stood at attention, his young face showing determination beyond his years. Raven, Amber and Crystal formed a line beside him, their earlier hostility replaced by something approaching respect. And Caleb, standing slightly apart, his expression a mixture of fear and pride. We wanted to see you off, Hugo said, and to give you something. He held out his hand. The worn challenge coin, the one that had fallen from a rooftop in Fallujah 15 years ago, lay in his palm. I can't accept that, Ivory said. It's yours. It was always yours. Hugo pressed the coin into her hand. I was just keeping it safe until you could take it back. The metal was warm from his grip, smooth from years of handling. Ivory closed her fingers around it, feeling the weight of history and sacrifice, an impossible survival. Take care of them, she said, nodding toward the recruits. All of them. Teach them what it means to be soldiers. Real soldiers. We will. Solomon stepped forward. And when you come back, we'll be ready to help. Whatever you need. When I come back, Ivory smiled slightly. I like your optimism. It's not optimism. Solomon's voice was firm. It's faith. You survived Kandahar. You survived 15 years of hiding. You'll survive this too. The transport was waiting, rotors already spinning. Ivory walked toward it, then paused and turned back. Tell the general something for me, she said to Hugo. Tell him the ghosts aren't just gathering. We're hunting. She climbed into the helicopter without waiting for a response. The door closed behind her, and within moments, she was airborne, watching Fort Bragg shrink beneath her, until it was just another pattern in the landscape. Below her, a base full of soldiers continued their training, unaware of the shadow war that was about to explode. Above her, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising storms to come, and somewhere in the darkness between nations, enemies who had thought themselves safe were about to learn a terrible truth. You cannot kill what was never truly alive. You cannot bury what refuses to stay dead. And you cannot hunt ghosts without becoming haunted yourself. Ivory leaned back in her seat, feeling the challenge coin warm against her palm. 15 years of running, 15 years of hiding, 15 years of letting the world believe she was gone. That time was over now. The ghost was awake, and she was coming for everyone who had ever tried to put her in the ground. The helicopter banked toward the east, toward Europe, and enemies and answers that had been too long delayed. Behind her, the sun rose over Fort Bragg, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A new day, a new mission, a war that had never truly ended. And somewhere in the distance, the ghosts were indeed gathering. Not to hide, not to run, but to fight. The story of Ghost Unit 7 was not over. It was only beginning again. And this time, there would be no survivors among those who had betrayed them. None at all. This is more than a story about a hidden warrior. It is a reminder that true heroes rarely announce themselves. They do not wear their medals on their sleeves or their sacrifices on their face. They walk among us every day, carrying burdens we cannot see, fighting battles we will never know about. Ivory endured mockery, humiliation, and dismissal from people who judged her by her age, her appearance and her silence. Yet she never defended herself. She never demanded recognition. She simply waited for the truth to reveal itself in its own time. The lesson here is profound and uncomfortable.
How many times have we dismissed someone because they did not fit our expectations? How many times have we mocked the quiet ones, the older ones, the ones who seemed out of place? Every person you meet is fighting a war you know nothing about. Every stranger carries a story that might bring you to your knees if you knew the full truth. Respect is not something people should have to earn through dramatic revelation. It is something every human being deserves from the very first moment you meet them. So here is my challenge to you. Tomorrow, when you encounter someone who seems weak, or unimportant, or out of place, pause. Remember Ivory. Remember that the person standing before you might be a ghost, a hero, an angel in disguise. Treat everyone as if they might be carrying medals you will never see, because they just might.